So based on a lamb feeding 10 people, Josephus's estimation was 250 million, or upwards of 250 million. The Roman army had estimated 1.1 million. So it's somewhere in between those numbers of all of the people who died inside the city of Jerusalem during this Roman siege. And the temple and the walled city of Jerusalem was always thought to be a great fortress, and it's estimated that there was enough food in the temple treasury to last about 3 years approximately. So all the people had to do was shut themselves up in this fortress and then outlast the army that was coming against them. And they had 3 years to do so. But because this guy, I think his name was John Levi, burned the food, they went into a famine instantly. So that was about the famines in various places, but there was also the famine that Paul collected money for, but that was also that many will come in my name type thing. Is it this one? Okay, then he gets to verse 15. Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation, or actually it's from Daniel, the abomination that causes desolation. The abomination of desolation sounds like more of a specific thing. Like the abomination of desolation sounds like the title of a thing, like a title of a noun. But the abomination is the noun that causes desolation, is the thing that the abomination causes. So he says, so when you see that, which is spoken of Daniel, let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. So it's a localized event, is Judea, flee to the mountains. And he's not saying, when you see this thing, flee to the fortified city that has the food, that has the fortress, go to the mountains where you're open, exposed, and not protected. So that's very counterintuitive to the instruction that would typically be given. Like when you see this army, go protect yourself in the fortress. Okay, I want to back up just a little bit. He says, flee to the mountains. Don't go off your rooftop, just get out. If you're in the field, don't go get your cloak. Woe to the pregnant and nursing. Pray that your flight might not be in winter or on the Sabbath, and there's going to be great tribulation. Luke uses that term, and then those 4 or 5 points of flee to the mountains, rooftop, cloak, woe to the pregnant and nursing mothers, and pray it's not on Sabbath. So he uses those like 5 pointers.
What is the chapter and verse of Luke?
I'm going there. It's Luke 21.
Same.
Let me find it. He says, in verse 20, he says, when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then recognize that her desolation is at hand. So it's the armies that are causing desolation. And it's the same point. He says, let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains, in the midst of the city to depart. Those are the days of vengeance. Woe to those who are with child. There'll be great distress. So he's using the same kinds of things. But Luke tells us it's the armies surrounding Jerusalem that cause desolation. Matthew calls it the abomination of desolation, but it's the abomination that causes desolation. So what Jesus is talking about specifically is this Roman army who's coming, and it's going to cause total desolation to the city of Jerusalem. Many false prophets, false Christs will come. Behold, I've told you in advance. Therefore, if anyone says to you, behold, he's in the wilderness, don't go there. or just as lightning comes from the east and flashes to the west, so shall the coming of the Son of Man be. So he used all of that to answer their question. What is the sign of your coming? This is the sign of my coming. Desolation, destruction, I'm coming. So I want to compare that with Isaiah 13. Is it Isaiah? Oh, I'm looking at 14. That's why I can't find it.
Isaiah 14.
It's Isaiah 13, but I was looking at Isaiah 14. That's why I can't find it. So this is Isaiah. He's prophesying the destruction and fall of Babylon. But if you know Revelation and Matthew, and you start to hear the same words, the same imagery being used again. And as there was the immediate fulfillment of the prophet's prophecy, so Israel was taken away into captivity and taken away to Babylon. Babylon came and destroyed the country, the nation, and they were taken into Babylon. But then there's the future fulfillment of the temple, which we said before, both times the temple was destroyed on the 9th of Av in the same exact day, like 490 years later or something like that. So it's Isaiah 13. 13:6. Wait for the day of the Lord is near. It will come as destruction from the Almighty. Therefore, all the hands will fall limp, and every man's heart will melt, and they will be terrified. Pain and anguish will take hold of them. They will writhe like a woman in labor. They will look at another in astonishment, their faces aflame. Behold, the day of the Lord is coming. So here's the Lord, he's coming. It's cruel, with fury, burning anger, to make the land a desolation. He will exterminate its sinners from it. For the stars of heaven and their constellations will not flash forth their light. The sun will be dark when it rises, and the moon will not shed its light. They will punish the evil world for its evil, and the wicked for their iniquity. I will put an end to the arrogance of the proud and abase the haughtiness of the ruthless. I will make mortal man scarcer than pure gold. I will make the heavens tremble and the earth shake from its place, and the fury of the Lord of hosts in the day of his burning anger. So, did you recognize that, like, the sun, the moon, the stars, they're shaken, they're brought down? That's the imagery that the Revelations uses as well. But it was fulfilled in Isaiah's time, the first time around. So the sun, the moon, the stars didn't actually fall, but this was the prophet talking about the coming of Babylon. Like, the whole world is falling apart. It's expressive language, but it also is synonymous with Jacob and his brothers and his mom and dad. So, but then John uses that same language to say, hey, remember that? The sun, the moon, the stars, they fell, Israel fell. John in Book of Revelations is using that same terminology. Remember that the sun, the sign, it fell, we lost our temple, we got kicked out of our land. He's like recalling those things of, like, oh yeah, that's right. Israel was judged for its sins, the temple fell, we were kicked out of our land. So another thing in Matthew that was kind of interesting. First of all, one of the things that was interesting was he says, let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. It's a localized event. It's not a global event where everyone's supposed to run to the mountains. Another thing he says is pray that your flight won't take place on the Sabbath. And the Sabbath is speaking to a people who are still under Old Covenant law. Mm-hmm. Like, we don't care if something happens on Saturday, we're not restricted by any law saying that on Saturday you can't run away, you can't drive a car. So he's speaking specifically to people under the old covenantal system, like pray that it doesn't take place on the Sabbath. Let's see. So I was listening to Welton. He said that, who wrote Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe?
C.S. Lewis.
C.S. Lewis said the most embarrassing verse in the entire Bible was that all this will take place in this generation, because it didn't happen. Like that, but he didn't know the history that Josephus gave us. Mm-hmm. So because all these things happened in exactly the way Jesus said. Not one single stone was left unturned. And a couple of times,
where is that?
It's 23:36 when Jesus says, "Truly I tell you, all these things shall come upon this generation." When he's announced that all the guilt of the righteous, from righteous Abel to Zechariah, will come upon this generation.
And that's Matthew.
Mm-hmm. And then that's Matthew 23:36 when he says like that blood guilt will come upon this generation. And then he goes on to explain what we know what happened historically, that in one of the verses it talks about the earth being laid bare, and that's literally what happened. Like so Titus came in to the temple, or into the gates of Jerusalem. He saw all the dead people. He told his soldiers, don't burn the temple, because Herod, it was one of the wonders of the ancient world. It was so wonderful. But his soldiers didn't listen to him. They got so enraged and inflamed, they started going around killing people and cutting people open, because when people were trying to escape, they were swallowing gold and trying to like hide it from the Romans. So the Romans started like taking the people who were still alive and slicing them in half to see if they could find gold coins inside their stomach and intestines. And then Titus said to save the temple, and the soldiers were like in this weird killing frenzy. Like they always followed orders, but this time they didn't. And somebody threw a torch into the temple, and that started burning, and all of the stones were covered with gold, and then it turned into this fiery furnace. As everything was on fire, the gold melted. It melted in between the cracks, and they took every stone off, one on top of the other, where Jesus said, do you see all these things? Not one stone will be left on another. Everything will be torn down. In other places it says, in other prophecies, is the earth will be laid bare, which is exactly what happened. They tore it down to the very earth, like nothing was left. And, okay, so that's Matthew. But he talks in Matthew 24, it goes on, in 29, he again repeats, the sun will be darkened, the moon will not give its light, the stars will fall from the sky, and the powers of the heaven will be shaken. So that's Matthew 24:29. So Jesus is recalling the prophet Isaiah 13, chapter 13's prophecy of the falling of the temple, because that's how Isaiah used that imagery. Jesus is recalling that same imagery and saying about this temple.